Have you ever felt that your kindness is not just misunderstood, but turned against you? That the more you give, the less you are seen, and the deeper you love, the lonelier you become? If so, what you're about to hear could change how you see yourself and the world. In the next few minutes, we will journey into Carl Jung's most unsettling yet liberating insights about goodness, power, and the shadow self. Prepare yourself, because this is not the kind of message that soothes. It is the kind that awakens, the kind that demands something of you. We live in a world that worships a certain image of goodness: to be always available, to forgive everything without hesitation, to serve others without ever asking for anything in return. Yet Jung, after decades of listening to the human soul in all its hidden corners, discovered that this ideal is not only unrealistic, it is deeply dangerous. Because when kindness becomes blind, when love loses its boundaries, we do not become saints. We become invisible. We become broken. Today, we will explore why true kindness is impossible without facing our inner darkness. Why your anger, your frustration, your longing for recognition are not flaws to suppress, but forces you must understand and integrate. And why, if you dare to embrace the parts of yourself you were taught to fear, you will finally discover a kindness that is no longer fragile but unshakable. This is the path from naive self-sacrifice to conscious wholeness. And it begins by stepping into the very shadow you've spent a lifetime trying to deny: the illusion of perfect goodness. From a young age, many of us are taught a silent but powerful lesson: that to be good means to disappear, to erase our needs, to silence our anger, to always be available without asking anything in return. It is a lesson woven into fairy tales, into cultural expectations, into the very air we breathe in so-called civilized societies. Especially in the West, where the ideal of the selfless giver is often glorified, goodness has been reduced to a hollow performance. Yet Carl Jung, through his years of studying the human soul, saw a disturbing pattern emerge from this narrative. Those who believed themselves to be the kindest, the most selfless, the most giving, were often the ones suffering the deepest, most invisible wounds. What does it truly mean to be good? Jung's answer was brutally honest. It is not about suppressing your needs, nor about killing your anger, nor about turning yourself into a permanent servant for the world. True goodness, he argued, cannot exist without authenticity. And authenticity demands that we acknowledge every part of ourselves, even the parts we have been taught to fear. Imagine kindness as a bright, steady flame. Society tells us to protect that flame by denying everything that could threaten it. But Jung understood that when we force ourselves into such narrow definitions of virtue, we do not protect our light. We suffocate it. We feed a growing darkness beneath the surface, a shadow that grows stronger with every act of forced niceness, every silent resentment, every moment we say yes when we mean no. In the polished suburbs of Western culture, where appearances matter more than substance, this shadow is often masked with smiles, with endless politeness, with a devotion to being nice at all costs. But beneath the surface, there is anger, bitterness, and deep fatigue. And slowly, invisibly, that fatigue hollows us out from within. Jung's warning was clear. When we mistake goodness for self-erasure, we not only betray ourselves, we betray others as well. Because the love we offer is no longer pure. It becomes tainted by unspoken expectations, by hidden anger, by a desperate hunger for recognition. And in the end, both the giver and the receiver are wounded. To step onto the path of true kindness, we must first be willing to tear down the illusion of perfect goodness. We must face the truth that we are not here to be endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly sacrificing. We are here to be whole. And sometimes, that wholeness demands that we set boundaries, that we say no, that we protect the flame of our own soul, even if the world calls it selfish. The shadow that grows in silence. The more we strive to embody an ideal of endless kindness, the more we strengthen the very forces we are trying to deny. Carl Jung understood this paradox intimately. He described the shadow not as a vague metaphor, but as a real psychological force, a living, breathing part of ourselves that grows stronger the more we repress it. In modern culture, particularly in societies obsessed with image and surface-level virtue, the shadow is an unspoken epidemic. People smile while simmering with resentment. They offer help while secretly aching for someone to notice their exhaustion. They maintain relationships built on endless giving, while their inner wells slowly run dry. It is the silent scream behind the polished dinner parties, the polite small talk, the endless volunteering at the cost of personal dreams. Jung warned that when we silence our anger, when we bury our needs under the guise of being good, the energy we repress does not simply disappear. It mutates. It leaks out in passive aggression, in quiet bitterness, in moments of emotional collapse we can no longer explain. Western psychology today speaks often of burnout, codependency, emotional exhaustion. But long before these terms became popularized, Jung had already seen the root cause, the failure to integrate the shadow. Repressed kindness is not pure. It is infected by the parts of ourselves we have denied. The unspoken needs, the swallowed rage, the hidden longing to be seen and valued. When kindness becomes a mask, it does not heal. It wounds. Imagine trying to hold a ball underwater with all your strength. It requires constant, exhausting effort. And no matter how skilled you are, eventually, your muscles will fail, and the ball will burst to the surface with a force you cannot control. This is what happens to those who try to maintain an image of perfect goodness. Their shadow grows in silence, gathering strength, until it erupts in ways they neither understand nor desire. Sudden bursts of anger, chronic fatigue, deep, inexplicable sadness. Relationships that crumble under the weight of unspoken resentments. The tragedy is not just personal. It is cultural. In teaching people to value appearance over authenticity, society has created generations of walking contradictions, individuals who long to be loved for who they are, yet fear revealing who they truly are. Jung's wisdom calls us to stop this cycle, to recognize that true strength lies not in suppression, but in integration, to understand that our anger, our needs, our frustrations are not enemies to be destroyed, but messengers pointing to parts of ourselves we must reclaim. Until we listen to them, until we honor them, we remain trapped in a life of silent suffering, mistaking repression for virtue and exhaustion for love. The hidden costs of blind kindness. Blind kindness does not simply exhaust us. It reshapes the very fabric of our lives in ways we rarely recognize until the damage is done. Carl Jung observed that those who devote themselves to endless giving, without boundaries or discernment, eventually pay a hidden price far greater than mere fatigue. They lose touch with their own essence. In the Western world, where the narrative of selflessness is often equated with moral superiority, this slow erosion of the self is praised rather than questioned. To be the one who is always there, who never says no, who sacrifices everything for others, is seen as noble. Yet beneath this cultural ideal lies a quiet tragedy, a life where personal dreams are delayed indefinitely, where emotional needs are silenced, where the individual's right to exist for themselves slowly dissolves into a constant existence for others. Imagine the life of someone who has made self-sacrifice their entire identity. Their schedule is packed with obligations, their heart burdened with the unspoken grief of 1,000 ignored needs. They become the confidant for everyone else's crises, the support system for everyone else's ambitions, while their own desires remain locked away, gathering dust. Over time, the act of giving transforms from a conscious choice into an unconscious compulsion. It becomes less about love and more about survival, about maintaining the image of goodness they believe is required to deserve belonging. The price of this blind kindness is not only emotional exhaustion, it is a soul-level fatigue, a slow, spiritual death where one becomes an empty vessel, existing only to meet the expectations of others. Jung saw that this dynamic often has roots in childhood. Perhaps it began as a way to earn love in a family that rewarded compliance over authenticity. Perhaps it grew out of survival, the need to maintain peace at any cost. But whatever its origin, it becomes a script that plays out in adulthood, chaining the individual to patterns of one-sided relationships and chronic self-neglect. The tragedy deepens when we realize that the world often does not recognize the quiet heroism of those who give everything. Instead, it normalizes taking. It teaches people to expect endless giving without gratitude, to cross boundaries without thought, to see the endlessly available soul not as precious, but as convenient. Jung's warning echoes louder today than ever. When we blind ourselves to our own needs in the name of kindness, we do not create a better world. We create relationships built on imbalance, resentment, and silent despair. True kindness must include the self. Without that, what we call love becomes a slow betrayal, not only of ourselves, but of everyone we touch. The silent rage beneath kindness. Every time we say yes when our soul screams no, a tiny fracture forms within us. Carl Jung understood that these small betrayals, accumulated over years, create a silent rage. A rage not directed outward in violent bursts, but inward, where it festers in the darkness of our unacknowledged needs. In the polished societies of the modern West, where conflict avoidance is often mistaken for maturity and politeness is weaponized to suppress authentic emotion, this silent rage is a pandemic. It shows up in the deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep can heal, in the chronic dissatisfaction that clings to even the most outwardly successful lives, in the quiet moments of despair when, despite doing everything right, we still feel hollow and unseen. Jung taught that when we deny our anger, we do not eliminate it. We merely drive it underground, where it operates in the shadows, influencing our thoughts, our choices, our relationships without our conscious awareness. The overly kind person does not erupt like a volcano. They corrode slowly, like water wearing away stone. Their resentment leaks out in sighs, in passive resistance, in the subtle deadening of their spirit. Over time, their kindness loses its vitality. It becomes brittle, conditional, transactional. They give, but with a hidden ledger in their hearts, keeping silent accounts of the love, recognition, and respect they crave but rarely receive. Consider the dynamic in many Western workplaces, where employees are praised for going above and beyond yet quietly punished for asserting boundaries. The worker who sacrifices weekends, family time, and personal health is celebrated, while the one who dares to say no is often sidelined or labeled difficult. This cultural pattern is not limited to corporations. It permeates friendships, families, even spiritual communities. The one who gives endlessly becomes expected to give endlessly, and any attempt to reclaim space is met with confusion, guilt-tripping, or abandonment. Jung's insight pierces through these illusions. He reminds us that anger is not the enemy. It is a sacred messenger. It points to where our boundaries have been crossed, where our needs have been ignored, where our dignity demands to be honored. To silence it in the name of goodness is to silence a vital part of our own soul. The challenge is not to eradicate anger, but to listen to it, to let it guide us toward healthier, more authentic ways of being. Only then can our kindness be restored to its true form, a gift freely given. The power hidden in the shadow. For those raised to believe that goodness is the absence of anger, the thought of embracing the shadow feels like heresy. Carl Jung challenged this illusion by revealing that the shadow is not just a collection of our worst impulses. It is a reservoir of untapped power, of vital forces we have disowned in our attempt to be good enough for love, acceptance, or belonging. In the cultures of the modern West, there is a strange glorification of harmlessness. The ideal citizen, the ideal employee, even the ideal friend, is often imagined as someone who causes no disruption, demands little, and adapts without complaint. But Jung warned that this model produces not saints, but hollow shells, people who have forgotten how to protect themselves, how to assert their dignity, how to say no with the full authority of their being. The shadow, when approached with courage and respect, becomes not a source of corruption, but a wellspring of vitality. It holds our rightful anger, the kind that rises when injustice is done. It holds our need for recognition, not as vanity, but as a deep human need to be seen and valued. It holds our ability to set limits, to define where we end and others begin. Without these forces, kindness becomes weak, resentful, unsustainable. True strength arises not by amputating parts of ourselves, but but by bringing the rejected parts back into conscious harmony. Consider how often Western self-help culture promotes an image of relentless positivity. Good vibes only has become a mantra in many spaces, a demand that we ignore pain, anger, sadness in favor of forced smiles and hollow affirmations. Yet anyone who has tried to live this way knows the truth. Repressing half of your emotional reality does not create happiness. It creates fracture. It breeds quiet desperation beneath a facade of cheerfulness. Jung offers a different path. He invites us to acknowledge that anger and generosity, sadness and joy, strength and tenderness, all belong to the full spectrum of being human. The task is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it, to recognize that our boundaries are as sacred as our compassion, that our no is as valuable as our yes. Only then can we step out of the brittle performance of endless giving and into a more powerful, authentic form of kindness. A kindness that is rooted not in fear of rejection, but in the strength of wholeness. The journey toward this integration begins with a simple but radical act, daring to see ourselves fully, light and shadow alike, and honoring what we find there. Awakening through authentic boundaries. The path to reclaiming our wholeness demands more than inner reflection. It requires outer action, the courage to set authentic boundaries, even when it feels like betrayal. Carl Jung saw boundary setting not as selfishness, but as the natural expression of a soul that has learned to honor its own worth. In Western societies, where overextension is often praised as virtue and personal sacrifice mistaken for moral superiority, setting limits can feel almost criminal. Saying no challenges the silent contracts we have upheld for years, the agreement that we will always be available, always forgiving, always saying yes. But without boundaries, kindness is a lie. It becomes a performance, a thin mask stretched over growing resentment. Imagine the invisible contracts many of us carry. If I am good enough, you will love me. If I never disappoint you, you will stay. These unspoken deals shape our behavior from childhood into adulthood, binding us to patterns of people-pleasing and silent suffering. Jung's wisdom invites us to break these contracts, not through anger, but through truth. To assert, gently but firmly, that our time, our energy, our emotional resources are not infinite wells for others to draw from at will. They are sacred. They require stewardship, protection, respect. In Western work culture, this dynamic plays out with brutal clarity. Workers who give endlessly are rewarded only with more demands. The myth that overwork is heroic hides the deep rot beneath, a systemic exploitation of those unwilling to say enough. Likewise, in personal relationships, the one who sets no boundaries becomes the emotional sponge for everyone else's chaos, absorbing pain without reciprocation. Over time, the soul that once offered kindness freely now clings to the hope that someone, anyone, will finally notice their exhaustion. But recognition rarely comes, because when we teach others that we have no limits, they believe us. Setting boundaries is not about closing our hearts. It is about preserving the conditions in which genuine love, genuine giving can survive. It means accepting that some will be disappointed, that some relationships will change, that not everyone will understand. It means enduring the discomfort of guilt and fear without letting them dictate our actions. Jung knew that the integration of the shadow demands this kind of bravery, the willingness to disappoint others in order to remain true to ourselves. Real kindness does not ask us to bleed endlessly for others. It asks us to show up whole, to give when it is right, and to withhold when it is necessary. It asks us to honor both the needs of others and our own soul with equal reverence. Only then can we create relationships rooted not in dependency or silent resentment, but in mutual respect, authenticity, and strength. The sacred balance of giving and receiving. To understand true kindness, we must look beyond the simplistic idea of self-sacrifice and embrace a deeper, more balanced truth. Carl Jung saw that authentic relationships are built not on endless giving from one side, but on a sacred rhythm of giving and receiving. In the West, particularly in cultures influenced by Christian martyrdom narratives, the ideal of virtue has been twisted into a model of constant self-denial. To serve, to forgive, to endure without expectation has been praised as the highest form of love. But Jung warned that when we elevate endless giving to a virtue without discernment, we betray the natural laws of psychological health. True connection cannot survive in a one-sided exchange. Love without reciprocity becomes obligation. Kindness without boundaries becomes exploitation. Compassion without self-respect becomes self-erasure. Imagine a river that only gives water outward without ever being replenished. Sooner or later, it dries up, leaving only a cracked, barren landscape where life once thrived. Human souls are no different. We need the flow of mutual recognition, mutual support, mutual respect to remain alive and vital. Yet in many modern cultures, particularly those that idolize individual heroism and silent endurance, asking for anything in return is seen as weakness. To need is considered shameful. To assert one's limits is judged as selfishness. And so, many quietly suffer in relationships where they give everything and receive little, believing that suffering itself makes them more worthy. Jung shattered this illusion by insisting that recognizing our own needs is not selfish. It is the foundation of real love. A relationship where only one person gives, while the other only takes, is not a relationship between equals. It is a dynamic of power and dependency masked as affection. True kindness must respect the dignity of both the giver and the receiver. It must flow in both directions, nourishing all parties involved, or it will eventually curdle into resentment, fatigue, and quiet despair. This understanding invites us to reevaluate not only our personal relationships, but our entire cultural narratives about love and virtue. It demands that we challenge the silent agreements that ask us to exhaust ourselves for others' comfort. It asks us to speak honestly about our needs, our limits, our humanity. Jung believed that the courage to claim what we need to ask, to receive, to expect respect, is not a betrayal of kindness. It is the ultimate fulfillment of it. Because only when we honor our own soul's worth can we truly honor the souls of others. The alchemy of shadow and light. The transformation Jung described is not a simple shift from bad to good, from anger to peace, from brokenness to wholeness. It is an alchemy, a merging of opposites into a higher unity. True psychological growth does not come from eliminating the dark parts of ourselves, but from allowing light and shadow to coexist in conscious balance. In modern Western culture, especially in the realm of self-help and personal development, there is often an obsessive pursuit of positivity. Darkness is treated as a disease to be eradicated, sadness as a weakness to be overcome, anger as a failure of character. But Jung knew this mindset was deeply flawed. To banish the shadow is not to become whole, it is to become fractured. A person who rejects their own anger, sorrow, and desire becomes not more virtuous, but more hollow, living a half-life, cut off from the vital energies that give depth and meaning to existence. The true work of transformation, Jung taught, is to invite the shadow to the table, to listen to what our anger tells us about our boundaries, to learn from the sadness that reveals where our hearts have been neglected, to honor the fierce, protective energy that rises when we are wrong. This process is not comfortable. It requires the courage to see what we have spent years avoiding. It demands honesty, so radical that it can shake the very foundations of the identity we have built. But it is only through this confrontation that real change becomes possible. Imagine a garden long neglected, overgrown with weeds, choked by thorns. It would be easy to label the garden as ruined and give up. But Jung invites us to take a different view. Beneath the wildness, the soil is still fertile. The chaos hides the possibility of new life. The task is not to pave over the garden in sterile concrete, but to clear the weeds with care, to nourish the soil, to allow what is healthy to grow strong. In the same way, integrating the shadow does not mean becoming perfect. It means becoming real. It means learning to discern which parts of ourselves have been misunderstood, which impulses can be transformed into strength, and which wounds can become sources of wisdom. The alchemy of light and shadow creates a new kind of power, a power rooted not in domination, but in authenticity. It is the quiet strength of a person who knows their darkness, but is no longer ruled by it. the calm certainty of someone who can say no without anger and yes without fear. In this integration, we discover a deeper kind of kindness, one that no longer needs to deny reality, but embraces it fully, fiercely, and with grace. Redefining power through wholeness. In embracing the shadow, we do not become dangerous or cruel. We become powerful in a new, sacred way. Carl Jung taught that true power is not the brute force of domination, but the quiet, unshakable presence of someone who has reconciled their inner contradictions. In a culture that often confuses aggression with strength and silence with goodness, this form of integrated power is deeply subversive. It challenges the very foundations upon which modern Western society rewards behavior. Those who dominate, who suppress, who appear relentlessly positive while manipulating behind the scenes are often elevated. Meanwhile, those who show vulnerability, those who speak hard truths, those who assert boundaries without violence, are often misunderstood or marginalized. Yet it is precisely these integrated souls that embody the highest form of strength, the strength that neither seeks to control others nor allows itself to be controlled. To walk this path is to abandon the exhausting quest for external validation. It is to stop measuring our worth by how much we give, how much we endure, how much we are praised. Instead, it is to root our worth deep within ourselves, in the soil of our own authenticity. This shift is not easy. It requires letting go of long-held illusions about who we are supposed to be. It demands that we mourn the false self we built to survive, the mask of endless kindness we wore to be accepted. But in that mourning, something extraordinary happens. We find ourselves not emptier, but fuller. Not weaker, but stronger. Not colder, but more alive. Imagine a tree battered by storms, its roots driven deeper into the earth with every gust of wind. It does not apologize for needing strong roots. It does not shrink itself to make others more comfortable. It stands, it bends when needed, but it remains. This is the nature of the power Jung described. It is the power of groundedness, of knowing where we end and where others begin, of giving love freely, but never at the cost of self-betrayal. In reclaiming this integrated strength, we discover that our kindness becomes more potent, not less. We give not from emptiness or compulsion, but from abundance and conscious choice. We set boundaries not from fear, but from love for ourselves and for others. We no longer drain ourselves in the desperate hope of being valued. We know our value. And in knowing it, we invite others to meet us at a higher, truer level of relationship, one built not on sacrifice and resentment, but on mutual respect, authenticity, and real human connection. The journey toward wholeness. The transformation Jung invites us into is not a destination we can rush toward. It is a daily practice, a slow and sacred unfolding. It is a choice we must make again and again to honor our light without denying our shadow, to give without losing ourselves, to love without betraying our own soul. In a world that demands perfection, constant positivity, and endless availability, the decision to live authentically is an act of profound rebellion. To be whole is to accept the full range of our humanity without shame. To recognize that our anger, our grief, our longing, and our strength are not obstacles to kindness. They are the soil from which real compassion grows. Imagine standing before a mirror that does not distort your reflection. You see yourself clearly, the parts you are proud of and the parts you would rather hide. And instead of recoiling, you stay. You meet your own gaze with gentleness. You extend to yourself the understanding you have so often reserved only for others. This is the beginning of wholeness, not in the absence of flaws, but in the integration of every part of who you are. Western culture often sells the illusion that wholeness is about achievement, about accumulating enough success, admiration, or control to finally feel complete. But Jung reminds us that true wholeness is an inner alchemy. It has nothing to do with how the world sees us and everything to do with how we see ourselves. It is the quiet, steady realization that we are already enough, not because we have given endlessly, not because we have been perfect, but because we have dared to be real. When we walk this path of conscious integration, we not only heal ourselves, we change the world around us. Our relationships become more honest, more reciprocal, more alive. Our presence becomes a refuge for others not because we fix them, but because we embody the truth that it is possible to live with both strength and tenderness. We become lighthouses, not candles burning ourselves out. We guide, we shine, but we remain grounded, unwavering, whole. And so the invitation is simple, though never easy. Look within. Notice the parts of yourself you have denied in the name of being good. Welcome them back with the same compassion you offer to those you love. Begin the slow, beautiful work of integration. Remember that your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by your willingness to be wholly, fiercely, unapologetically yourself. This is not a path for the faint of heart, but it is the only path that leads to real freedom, real power, real love. If this message resonates with something deep inside you, take a moment to honor that. Let it be the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, one rooted not in endless giving, but in conscious, courageous wholeness. And if you feel called, share this journey with someone who needs to hear it too. Together, step by step, we are rewriting what it means to be truly kind, truly strong, truly alive.